This marker is where an historic experiment occurred during the Civil War. It is where a colony was formed for escaped slaves, a place where they had their own community.
It was a long and bloody war, pitting brother against brother, North against South. As the North gained territory, some Southern slaveholders abandoned their slaves and ran. This marker shows the site where local black people tasted freedom for the first time.
I've heard of the Freedmen's Colony on Roanoke Island, but I never realized where it is. It's great. This highway marker is here. Now every time I walk or ride my bike here, I am going to think about this.
After arriving on Roanoke Island, the former slaves assisted the Union troops build forts and served as woodcutters and carpenters. They also performed other tasks for Union troops, like cooking and serving meals and cleaning. Some even served as spies and guides for soldiers who were fighting for slavery to end. Several men once enslaved on Roanoke Island and nearby joined the Union and helped to win important battles in the war against the South.
As more and more people sought freedom on Roanoke Island, the Freedmen's Colony continued to grow. Several schools were established, as well as a sawmill. People who came to the Freedmen's Colony were given small portions of land to build their own homes and to raise their own crops. For the first time, those who had been enslaved were given a taste of independence and freedom. And one of the first things built was a place where escaped slaves could worship together, a church. Can you imagine how they must have felt? Finally having their own home, school, and church, and the hope for living a better life.
It must have been like living in a whole new world. What happened to the Freedmen's Colony? Are there any photos that show what it looked like?
Unfortunately, the Freedmen's Colony did not last long, just a few years. At the end of the Civil War, the government ordered all land that was provided to people living at the colony to be given back to the original owner of the land. Afterwards, most freedmen and their families left Roanoke Island to search for another place to live a better life. Only a few who were once at the Freedmen colonies remained. Unfortunately, there are no photographs to show what the Freedmen's Colony on Roanoke Island looked like. However, historical documents exist showing the names of many of the people who were at the Freedmen's Colony. Some black families who live on Roanoke Island today are known descendants of the people who lived at the Freedmen's Colony.
This is Richard Etheridge's grave. I know about him. He grew up enslaved on Roanoke Island. A man named John B. Etheridge, who was part of a wealthy white family on Roanoke Island, owned him.
Very good, Barkley. That's right. John B. Etheridge was Richard Etheridge's owner. The Etheridge family was wealthier than most families who lived on Roanoke Island and nearby. They owned lots of land, including land where the Body Island Lighthouse is located.
I heard about him too. Wasn't he the keeper of the P Island station? I learned about him at school.
That's right. But before working at the P Island station, Etheridge was enslaved on Roanoke Island and served as a soldier during the Civil War. When the war was over, he returned to Roanoke Island, got married, and had a child. He also became active in the community. A few years later, he joined the U.S. Life-Saving Service as the lowest surfman in rank at the Body Island Life-Saving Station. After this, he was selected to be the keeper of the P Island Station.
I heard about that too. When he was selected, the white surfmen at the P Island station refused to work for him. Etheridge then formed an all-black crew. Etheridge and his crew performed hundreds of rescues of those whose lives were in danger at sea.
Look, here's the grave of John B. Etheridge. John B. Etheridge had a commercial fishing business. He also was once the person in charge of the Body Island Lighthouse. Richard Etheridge has the same last name as John B. because slaves were required to take the last name of their owner. This is how Richard Etheridge got his last name when he was born.
Let's continue to walk. There is much more to see. This memorial is where many of the enslaved were buried on Roanoke Island. There are no grave markers at this memorial, but a special study of the land here showed several graves are here. That is why this memorial was placed here. It is to remember the enslaved once on Roanoke Island. This memorial is also the first location in the state of North Carolina officially named part of the Underground Railroad.
So if a special study of land had not been done here, then no one would know the enslaved were buried here, or who they were. Is that right? There are no grave markers.
Right. Enslaved people didn't even have a right to their own name in death. They were buried usually with no marker or with a marker that just had the word slave written, or sometimes just an X to identify the spot as the burial location of someone once enslaved. Many who were once enslaved are buried at locations no one knows of, and because their grave sites are not marked.
Where are we now?
This is the First Flight of Freedom Monument, located at Fort Raleigh. This marker also is to remember people who sought freedom on Roanoke Island. The front is engraved with the scene of an enslaved family as they stand looking toward rays of sun as they shine through the clouds over a distant hill. The woman is shown on her knees with her hands outstretched towards the first light of freedom.
Wow, this is a beautiful monument. I never knew this was here. I love the name, First Light of Freedom. I imagine the people who escaped slavery were very happy to finally make it to Roanoke Island.
I bet they were too. Come on, there are a couple more places to explore. This church is another part of the history of the enslaved here. It's not the original church that was built here in 1865, but still, it is a very important part of the history of this area. Over time, 3 Haven Creek Baptist churches were built. This is the most recent of the 3. The first church was built on land given to Richard Etheridge by his former owner, John B. Etheridge. Each church was named Haven Creek Baptist Church to honor the people who came to Roanoke Island seeking a safe haven, a location where they could freely live.
Taking this hike makes me realize why having a place to worship was so important for those who were once enslaved.
It's so cool. The church is named Haven Creek Baptist Church, a church to remember those who sought freedom.
Yes, churches like Haven Creek Baptist Church played a huge role in helping those who were once enslaved. It is where they gathered, worshiped, and dreamed of having a better life. Come on, this is one more sight we want you to see.
Andrew Cartwright was a minister born in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Some say he was the son of enslaved parents. Others say that he was born free. Nothing's really known about his early life, except that he learned to read and write without having the opportunity to go to school and receive an education. He established the first African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church in northeastern North Carolina and became a leader over several churches. At the beginning of the Civil War, he and his wife had been living in England. During the war, he returned to North Carolina to minister to the freed slaves.
Wow, this was a great hike. I learned a lot about the Black history here. I also love this big, beautiful tree. After what we learned today, I think we should call it the Freedom Tree.
Yes, the Freedom Tree. It is a perfect name and starting point to learn about the struggle for freedom.
That is a perfect name. A very large and beautiful oak tree that has been here for hundreds of years through storms and beautiful weather. Just watching what life has been like here. Yep, the Freedom Tree. To remind people of freedom and that freedom isn't always free.